You can replace this text with any snow fell like a silent judgment over the valley the night they dragged her away. Her bare feet stumbled across the frozen ground, the thin shawl clinging to her bony shoulders as if it, too, feared being torn from her. At 17, Amara had already learned that in her family's eyes, she was not a daughter, but a burden. Her brothers called her the useless one, and even her mother's eyes held no warmth. So when a traveling trader came through the village and offered a handful of silver coins for the girl with the quiet eyes, they didn't hesitate. The trader didn't ask for her name. He didn't ask for her story. He tied her wrists with a coarse rope and led her to his cart like a goat bought for slaughter. The night swallowed the village behind her. No one came after her. Days bled into each other. Muddy roads, rain on the canvas roof of the wagon, rough hands shoving stale bread into hers when she grew too weak to walk. The trader spoke little, but when he did, it was about money. He had buyers in the hills, men who wanted wives, or something close enough to the word. Amara didn't ask questions. Questions had never saved her before. When they reached the edge of the mountains, the trader left her with a man she had never seen before. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a beard like black thorns and eyes the color of glacial water. He wore a patched wool coat and smelled of pine and smoke. The coins clinked between the trader's fingers as the exchange happened. And just like that, Amara was no longer her family's problem. She was someone else's property. The man's cabin stood far up the slope, hidden among ancient fir trees. It was a lonely place, the kind where echoes had their own echoes. He led her there without speaking, his boots crunching on the frost, and she followed because there was nowhere else to go. Inside, the cabin was warm from a crackling fire, but everything else was rough-hewn and sparse. A wooden table, a single chair, a bed built into the wall. He untied her wrists but didn't touch her. "You'll sleep there," he said, pointing to a corner where a pile of blankets lay. His voice was deep, worn by years of wind and silence. Then he went outside again, leaving her in the firelight with the smell of pine and ash. For days they barely spoke. He cut wood, hunted, and came back with rabbits or deer over his shoulder. She cooked what she could, swept the floor, mended the few clothes she had. At first she thought he was waiting for something, her obedience, her body, her gratitude. But the waiting stretched on and nothing came. It was weeks before she learned his name. "Callum," he said one morning as he set a fresh log on the fire. "If you're staying here, you might as well know it." She didn't tell him hers. She had lost the sound of it somewhere between her family's door and the trader's wagon. But one evening, while she was scrubbing blood from a rabbit pelt, he asked, "What do they call you?" "Nothing," she said. He stared at her for a long time, his brow furrowed like the ridges of the mountains outside. "Everyone has a name. Not me." After that, he started calling her wife. Not as a claim, not as a brand, but as if he were giving her a word she could live inside. At first it made her flinch, but over time it became something else. A kind of shield, a small dignity she had never been offered before. He built her a cabin beside his own, plank by plank, his hands splintered and raw. "You need a place that's yours," he said when she asked why. "If you want to stay, stay. If you want to leave, leave. But no one should be without a roof that's theirs." She watched him work through storms and sleet, his breath fogging in the air. He cut down trees, dragged them himself, shaped the beams. When she tried to help, he handed her tools without a word, showing her how to plane the wood smooth, how to set the nails straight. She had never built anything in her life, but by the time spring broke, the cabin stood ready. 4 walls, a roof that didn't leak, a small window facing the sunrise. He gave her seeds for a garden, taught her where to set the traps in the forest, how to read the weather by the smell of the wind. She still woke at night sometimes, heart hammering, sure she'd hear her family's voices calling her back, or the trader's rope around her wrists. But the only sound was the wind through the pines and Callum's slow, steady breathing from the other cabin. The first time she laughed, it startled them both. She was kneeling in the dirt, planting carrots, when a squirrel leapt onto the cabin roof and knocked a pile of snow straight onto her head. She gasped, sputtered, and then laughed, a sound like something breaking and healing at once. Callum, splitting logs nearby, turned to look at her as if she had grown wings. "You should laugh more," he said quietly. "I don't know how," she admitted. "You'll remember." She began to. Bit by bit, her body remembered other things too. How to hum while she worked, how to braid her hair, how to feel sunlight on her skin without flinching. She carved small figures from leftover wood and lined them on her windowsill. Birds mostly. They reminded her of freedom. Sometimes strangers passed through the mountains, hunters, traders, men with hard eyes. They saw her and asked questions. "That your wife?" they'd say to Callum. Yes, he'd answer simply. They'd look at her, measuring, curious, and she'd meet their gaze without lowering her eyes. The word wife sat on her like an unfamiliar cloak, but it was better than useless, better than nothing. Once one of the men made a joke, something filthy about women in cabins. Callum's jaw tightened. "You're not welcome here," he said, and his hand moved toward the axe buried in the chopping block. The man left quickly after that. That night, she sat by the fire in her own cabin, staring at the flames. Callum knocked once on the door before stepping inside. "You're safe here," he said. "I know." He hesitated. "Do you?" She met his eyes. "Ido." It became their quiet rhythm. Separate cabins, but shared meals. His big hands setting a wooden bowl in front of her, hers sliding it back empty. He called her wife, and she began, shyly, to call him husband. Not because he owned her, but because the word had begun to mean something entirely new. One morning, she woke to find him gone, tracks leading into the forest. Hours passed. Dusk crept over the valley. Panic rose in her like a tide. She followed the tracks, her heart pounding, until she found him at the edge of a frozen stream, his leg trapped under a fallen log. "Callum," she cried, the name tearing from her throat like a bird from a cage. He tried to smile. "Took you long enough." She worked until her palms bled, prying the log off him. By the time she dragged him back to the cabin, his face was white as snow. She built the fire high, boiled water, cleaned the wound. He drifted in and out of consciousness, muttering her name. Her name, the one she had whispered to him weeks earlier, just once. "Amara," he said over and over, like a prayer. She didn't leave his side for 3 days. When he finally woke, his hand found hers, rough and warm. "Guess you're stuck with me now," he murmured. She smiled through tears. "Guess so." The mountains thawed. Spring turned to summer. Her garden grew wild with color, the cabin filled with light. She still bore the scars of her old life, but in the hush of the pines, in the steadiness of Callum's presence, she began to build something she had never imagined. A self, a future, a quiet kind of belonging. And when travelers passed through and asked about her, Callum still called her wife, but now, when she met their eyes, she didn't flinch. She stood tall in the doorway of the cabin she had helped build, her hands calloused but steady, the scent of pine and earth clinging to her like a promise. "I'll text you."